Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Send Money to Claim an Inheritance. You got it. Okay, so all of you have probably experienced the classic Nigerian prince inheritance scam. This is where you will usually be asked to send money, usually described as a fee, to be able to claim an even bigger sum of money. One day I decided to have some revenge when I received one of these calls. The scammer was giving his spiel about how a long-lost relative of mine had died and I was the one to inherit the millions that was left solely to me. Playing along, I acted very excited and asked what needed to be done on my end. He said his legal firm needed a payment of £5,000 in order for the relevant paperwork to be processed. This is where I had a bright idea. I said to him that I did not have £5,000 in cash on hand, but I do, however, have a load of new electronics come in for my business that I could send to be sold. He jumped at the opportunity. So, I went into my shed and started wrapping up a broken washing machine I had. I had also filled the drum with multiple yellow pages to give it even more weight. When I organized a special courier to come pick up the massive parcel, I said that the delivery fee would be paid in full at the other end. With the delivery fee totaling over £500, I paid a small deposit and off the package went. A few weeks later I got confirmation that the parcel had been picked up and the full invoice paid on collection. I wish I could have seen the scammer's face when he opened it. The next one is titled, Company Recruits Me for Senior Position, Brings Me to Their HQ, Project Gets Cancelled While I'm Interviewing and I'm Supposed to Pay for the Trip? I don't think so. During the dot-com boom in the late 90s I became somewhat well known for my expertise with a now somewhat obsolete networking technology. I ended up getting heavily recruited by a big telecom firm in Denver to run the technical side of a huge networking project they had underway. After multiple phone interviews I was invited out for the big in-person sit-down, a 2-day affair where I met with the big dogs, other techies, HR, etc. It was a pretty killer opportunity. Took the trip. First day of meetings went great, I felt it was a great match, etc. I did sense there was some tension between two groups over network architecture. Turned out that was one of the reasons they were bringing in someone more senior who could finalize the approach and get the project moving. That was fine, all part of the job, whatever. Got wined and dined after the first day, was definitely feeling like the job was a match and that I'd be moving to Denver. Went in the second day and after another round of interviews the division head takes me to lunch. That's when it all blew up. While we were at lunch the firm's senior management canned the entire project and fired every person associated with it. Apparently there was a huge internal political war going on. This project was ground zero for the big battle and this division just lost. We get back from lunch and the manager escorts me to HR where we're going to sit down and go over their offer. Instead he's told what's going on and that he's out of a job along with everyone else on the project. At this point I was told to leave. No apologies, it was just shitty luck for me. What the duck? Okay then, I'm gone. I get back to the hotel and there's a voicemail for me asking me to call the HR people. I'm pissed but I call. They tell me they've had to cancel my return ticket and that I'd need to pay for the hotel myself for now, but that if I would submit an expense report they might be able to get me a check. There's a second voicemail from the front desk asking me to provide a credit card for the stay. And then I get a call on my cell phone from the car rental company which I didn't answer. Turns out they also wanted my credit card. Duck. That. I called the airline and they said my reservation had indeed been cancelled. But they also acknowledged that the reservation was paid for using a fully refundable ticket which I was holding and which back in the 90s was essentially as good as cash. Said they wouldn't know for certain if I could board until I showed up at the counter with the physical ticket. Great. Just ducking great. I'm on the hook for several thousand in airfare, nice hotel and rental car after taking several days of vacation from my job for this interview? I don't think so. Here's the revenge. I packed my bags and loaded up the rental car. Left the keys in hotel room door. drove the rental car back to Dallas, stayed overnight in Amarillo, dropped the rental at the Hertz lot at DFW Airport, took their shuttle to the terminal I'd left my car at and drove home. Over the next few months I got several nasty phone calls from their HR and accounting departments demanding I pay them back for the trip, including paying for the $700 drop-off fee for the car. Never answered them, of course, just let them go to voicemail. Eventually got a demand letter from their legal department, paid an attorney a nominal fee to send them a demand for compensation, threatened a lawsuit letter. Never heard from the firm again. Side note, the ticket itself was still valid. I ended up selling it to a friend at a big discount and he was able to use it. The next one is titled, Just Because You're a Professor Doesn't Mean You're Untouchable. I'm a student at a local community college because the Gen Ed classes are much cheaper. I had a heart transplant when I was younger, but it was too late, and now I suffer from chronic nerve pain that only gets worse the more active I am. So I have a handicap parking pass. One thing to note is that at this college with 5,000 plus students there's roughly 20 to 30 handicap spaces. On an average day there are more unused faculty spaces than handicap spaces total. Fast forward to my third semester. I had gotten into the habit of arriving 1.5 to 2 hours early to make sure I got a handicap spot because the next closest spaces are about 1,200 feet away and you had to climb a hill to get to the main building. I'd kill time by doing homework with my friends or playing D&D. First day of the semester I park, and as I'm getting my laptop out of my car I notice that another car had pulled up behind mine. The driver, older woman hereby referred to as EB, short for English Witch, asked if I was parking there. I of course answered, yes, I have a placard. She scoffs and says out loud, whose is it? Your grandmother's, and drives away. At the time I didn't think too much of it. I'm young and don't have a wooden leg or anything, so it's happened before. The next day I arrive like I always do and notice that all the handicap spots are full and that the same car from yesterday is parked there. This time I recognize the woman in it. She's an English professor. One of my friends has her for 18th century literature. I find this odd because the faculty spots are really close by. EB sees me and smirks. Whatever, I suck it up and park. That day me and my friends are playing D&D in a room we found. EB walks by and sees me and my friends and tells us that we're not allowed to be there and we need to leave this second. Now I'm really upset. She's only doing this to be a witch. We weren't hurting anyone and her class next door doesn't even start for almost an hour. But she still sits in that room and reads a novel. She does the same thing every chance she gets for weeks. So I've been thinking of a way to solve this problem for most of the semester. Talking to the English department head, my literature of science fiction teacher, I find out that she doesn't even have a placard. The one she hung from her mirror is her grown son's. Now I know what to do. Here's what I did: reserved the room she had her class in until 5 minutes before her class for Dungeons and Dragons Club with a sign and everything. Then I alerted campus police that several people were using other people's handicap tags. For those unaware, you get paperwork when you get one validating that it's yours. In my state, using one that's not yours is a towable offense and an automatic fine. So campus police start asking for people's paperwork. That day starts like most others that semester. Get there, she's in a handicap spot. I go to play Dungeons and Dragons. But when she comes to kick us out of her room, but she can't because I've reserved it. After I inform her of this, she storms off mumbling about seeing the dean. She comes back for her class, but by that time I'm on my way out. After my class, I go out to the lot and notice that her car is missing. Next day I arrive and EB's car isn't in one of the spots. It was towed. Best feeling of my life that day. My friend tells me later that she arrived to class 10 minutes late that day and covered in sweat. She biked there for the rest of the semester. Never had a problem with her for the rest of that semester. The next one is titled, Beating the Crap Out of the Man Who Abused and Beat My Mother for 6 years. 7 years later and she still has no idea. He was a vile, cynical, controlling excuse for a human being. He would call 20 times a day at least to ask her where she was, who she was with. He controlled her money, to the point where she had to hide cash away to have gas money for work. I found her battered and bruised one night, and called his A*S out on it. He got physical, so I swung. Managed to break his nose and cut him up fairly badly. My mum and I left that night and she got a house. He went to jail a few months later for violating a protection order she had. He walked up to her and my sister in the middle of a church and started screaming. We went to the police station and the dumbass actually followed us there. So he was arrested on the spot. Last I heard, he hasn't been able to get a job because of all the stuff on his record from that. The next one is titled, "She Put Her Finances on the Line and Wasn't About to Give Up So Easily." When I used to be a cheerleader, we were organizing a trip to Florida from the UK to do some training and to have an awesome holiday. I took charge of organizing the flights and asked everyone if they were okay paying me back if I bought all the flights together. Yeah, I know, bad idea. Anyway, needless to say, one girl changed her mind about going because she was starting a new job, and just before we were due to go I got a handwritten note in the post from her mother, we were in our 20s, saying that she never agreed to me booking a flight on her behalf and that she wasn't liable to pay me because she had decided not to go. I was in a bit of a panic because I didn't have her home address, and she just ignored all my calls and emails. I wanted to take her to court, but to do that you have to have their address in order to serve the papers. After spending ages trying to ask around if people knew her address, and even trying to get her friends to give it to me without success, I stayed up all night figuring out a way to figure out where she lived. It literally took me all night, but I managed to hack into her Hotmail account and then her PayPal account, which led me to her home address. I could have just taken the money from her account, but I did want to do this as by the book as possible. She turned up in court accompanied by her mother, and they tried to use Facebook photos to prove that I had used her ticket to take someone else in her place. I came armed with a printout of the airline terms which clearly stated that the tickets were non-transferable. Judgment was swift. The victory was mine. The next one is titled, "Vindicated." My first job out of high school was working for a rather famous and nationwide guitar store chain. At first I thought it would fun, getting to be around guitars all day, and talk music with fellow musicians. Turns out I was wrong, that 10-hour shifts 5 to 6 days a week while listening to slightly too loud overhead music and 14-year-olds play the first 5 bars of Crazy Train over and over and over again wasn't actually all that great. But I stuck it out. I needed money and I have one of those "don't quit ever" attitudes. When I got hired, the store was in serious trouble. They had recently fired a huge chunk of the staff for skimming profits and selling pot out of the warehouse. Their numbers were really low, and corporate was breathing down their necks. But, as it turns out, I have a penchant for selling stuff that I know about. I was the accessories guy, and got really, really good at it. I was routinely rolling $30,000 or better a month out the door, and the most expensive thing I had in my department was only $500. I also had one of the lowest return rates on the West Coast, and a file with several letters from happy customers saying how much help I had been. Eventually, the store's numbers improved, especially my department. Eventually, we were number 1 for our district, and number 3 on the West Coast, behind Hollywood and San Francisco. However, none of that mattered to the GM or anyone from corporate. All they wanted was more from me. My numbers had to be better every month, or I'd get yelled at. I was written up for having a low sales month one January because I went on vacation. I would get daily emails and phone calls from the district and regional managers, demeaning to know why I hadn't hit $XXX in sales yet. My hours got bumped up to the point where my days consisted of sleeping, showering, eating, and working. I had zero social life. My girlfriend at the time would go weeks without seeing me. Eventually, because of the stress, I developed an ulcer. So I decided to quit. I threw myself into my last month, which just happened to be December, the month all retail workers hate. I worked extra hours, sold as much as I could, contacted old customers, you name it. Blew everyone out of the water, rolling just shy of $80,000 in gear. My boss called me into his office, and said I was doing a good, not great, good job, and to keep it up. I pointed to the sales numbers screen, pointed out how well I had been doing and how well liked I was by the customers, and asked for a raise. He laughed and said no. So I handed him my resignation letter. 2 weeks later I was done and starting classes in college, something I'd had to put off since work wouldn't allow me to cut hours for school. I came back to the store a couple months later, as someone who had worked with me called and said they'd found a jacket of mine in the warehouse. When I showed up, the GM wasn't there. I asked, and what I was told was that apparently, corporate had noticed me, and when my GM had failed to retain me, they'd fired him. Also, that department went from number 1 to number 9 in the district, out of 11 stores. The district managers were scrambling to recover, a few got demoted because of how things panned out, and the extreme higher-ups were not happy that the district was in such a state. I laughed the laugh of the vindicated. The last one is titled, "Lay off a third of the team and expect us to work harder." We will see about that. So this happened sometime in the 2010s somewhere in the UK, that's all I'm revealing. I worked for a medium-sized PLC in a small team that worked with the sales department getting quotes. I had previously worked in another team in a different department in the same company as well. So to set the scene, the company had recently had some issues with regulators and senior management were either oblivious to the damage they were doing or didn't care. They were trying to save costs but going about it all the wrong way. So my team consists of 6 team members and a manager. We were fairly busy and often helped out on other teams as well, and they would in turn help us. This is important for later, so we are all called into a meeting without warning and told that due to declining work tickets they were laying 2 of us off. They did say 2 people were safe, the manager and his sidekick. They made us reapply for our jobs, including doing a test following the letter of the law on redundancy, which had nothing to do with our roles. It also became apparent during the process that the company flat out lied or at the very minimum manipulated the data used to come up with their conclusion of falling ticket numbers. They dropped by 13 from year 1 to year 3. Bear in mind it was a total of several thousand tickets a year. In the end the company carried on and 2 team members were removed and made redundant, one of whom took a golden handshake, the other sued the company for various things not really worthy of mention here, and won. After the dust settled it also became apparent manager secured his sidekick's position despite him being the worst member of the team in terms of work done and work quality. So in the weeks after the entire team were too busy to help other teams who then stopped helping us, so a huge backlog of tickets also built up. We also got threatened with disciplinary proceedings if our backlog didn't come down, but was also refused any overtime. During the process we had also been admonished for skipping steps in getting quotes, steps that often took a significant amount of time, and served no purpose, so me and 2 others remaining, not including Sidekick who had his nose so far up manager's rear ended in came out of his mouth, decided to do everything by the book, down to every last bullet point. This made the backlog of work even worse, but they couldn't say anything. One week we had another meeting with HR, the sales director and our manager to discuss the issues. We all calmly said, "We are sorry, but we have to follow the guidelines and rules laid down and this is as fast as we can work." We were also asked to start helping out the other teams again as we should be team players. Again we said, "We are sorry but we can't, our workload is too high and it's also not in our contracts that we have to do other teams' work." This went on for several months and management still refused to believe we were overworked. When it was time for holidays we realized they hadn't changed the amount of people allowed off from 3. So we all booked holidays, they both went abroad and I decided to visit family the other end of the UK. Of course when manager realized, a week before, he went nuts and another meeting with HR was called. We all calmly said, "Sorry but we checked the rules for our team and 3 people out of 4, manager could do what he likes, can be off at any one time." And again stood our ground and all went on leave for 2 weeks each. This caused even more chaos at work as you can imagine. The sales director after this hatched a plan to get the Indian teams, we had offices in India and other offshore places, to be trained up by us and to help us. However they demanded we fly out to spend weeks there training them. Again we all refused as it's not in our contracts to be trainers or to have to work abroad. They ignored the fact I didn't have a passport at this point. So, poor old manager and his sidekick traveled out and trained them for weeks. Eventually both stayed for over 2 months and failed to train them. We would send low-effort tickets to them and they would screw it up and we simply said, "Sorry, to fix this we need to do it again." So after 6 months they gave that idea up entirely. After around a year or so of this, I'm being deliberately vague on timing, so please don't ask about it. We all decided to all seek other employment, having found we all could not trust the company or manager anymore. And we all found roles elsewhere within a week of each other, so all handed our 4-week notices, again to the letter of our employment contracts, and were due to all leave on the same day. Now the female member of the team, who was a very learned person, and she revealed in all our contracts any documentation we create is ours and we can do with it how we wish when we leave. So we hatch a plan. In the final week we are there, we move all our digital stuff to one location, including all my manuals and cheat sheets for my previous team. They both did the same with their previous positions within the company. On our final day, we bring in our own external drives and with its help download and removed all documentation and deleted the copies on the company systems. We all said our goodbyes and at the end of the day quite happily told our manager what we had done. He exploded and demanded it back, and we calmly tell him not according to the letter of our contracts. This, waving the drives at him, is ours and we choose to remove it with us. We were later told by friends who remained that the sales director had a fit because now no one was doing quotes for him. Gladly we all have had great new places and keep in touch. Thanks for listening.